Dr. Cerfolio, in your article, you mentioned that one of the most common traits among mass shooters is that they have intelligence. Now, many people will hear that and then they'll find it quite weird to say something like that, right? Because you don't want to give them that compliment. But the reality is, if you do look at a lot of mass shooters and their track records, there is evidence that shows us they do have intelligence. And I have a few examples here, which I'm just going to quickly mention just to make that point more clear, and then we can get into it. Okay. So if you look at the 2012 Colorado shooting during the movie Dark Knight Rises, that individual graduated with a bachelor's in neuroscience at the top 1% of his class with a 3.94 GPA. And he was enrolled in a PhD program in neuroscience at the age of 24. So obviously a lot of potential there. Number two, if you look at the Santa Fe high school shooter, that person was on the honor roll. And number three, if you look at the Las Vegas massacre, that person was a wealthy former accountant and real estate investor who was making more than $500,000 per year at one point. So to have these achievements, you have to have a certain level of cognitive capability, right? Yeah. Now, what I'm wondering is, what are the different life events that lead a person up to a point where they want to become a mass shooter? And what exactly is that thought process? Because normally if you're intelligent, you'll be able to figure out like what mindset is too extreme and what's not. But they weren't able to do that, right? So again, what are those life events and what is that thought process that's so convincing for them?
Right. So first I want to start with your comment about the fact that they're intelligent, and
yeah,
every single one of the mass shooters I've studied, and I've studied hundreds now. I've been privileged to study their court records with forensic evaluations and CAT scans and MRIs, which is privileged information that most people don't have, as well as interviewing forensic psychiatrists who have evaluated them. They're all smart. They all have very high IQ. And because of that, they're able to hide usually. So in my study that I did, and in my book, so I wrote a book, Psychoanalytic and Spiritual Perspective on Terrorism, Desire for Destruction. I discuss all this, but in my book and in the research, we found that 87.5% of the domestic mass shooters that we studied had severe mental illness, meaning they were psychotic. Often they hear voices telling them to kill. Often they have voices telling them that they're no good, but if they listen to the voice that's telling them to kill, then they're good. And they're able to hide that psychotic process from judge, doctor, lawyer, teachers. And it's kind of a recurring problem of many of the cases that I've studied. But to answer the bigger, broader question that you asked me, like what makes a mass shooter is, and this is over and over again, like I can go into the Georgia high school shooter, who was 14-year-old. I'm going to try not to say his name.
Yeah, that's exactly why like I didn't mention that. I know. Like I know that you don't like to say their names. Yeah.
Yeah, because you don't want to talk negative about someone, but you also don't want to glorify it.
Yeah, for sure.
And in part, and it's usually boys, these boys want notoriety. The Las Vegas shooter was a man, but he definitely wanted notoriety. Actually, his father was a famous bank robber, and he wanted to outdo his father and go down in infamy. He actually had a severe medical illness that impaired him, and he was dying. So that's actually, I think, the basis of why he did what he did in part. But so what all these mass shooters have in common? They come from families where they're abused, where they're neglected. So I'm going to use the Georgia high school shooter as an example. He's 14 years old. He grew up in a family where both parents were addicted to drugs and alcohol. His mother was a methamphetamine addict as well as opioids and alcohol. His parents divorced. Though all of them usually come from broken families, and they're dislocated frequently. So for the Georgia high school shooter, he was, I believe, in a 6-year period, he had 5 different houses. So he was in 5 different school systems. His mother threatened to kill him twice she was on a methamphetamine high. And he really thought that she was going to kill him. There was a point with him in his childhood that the father had taken custody of him, and the mother wanted to go visit her children, and she went to her mother and said, "You have to come with me," because he was living, I don't know, like 3 hours away at this point. And the mother refused, so she bound up her mother and wrecked her house, and then went to actually the father's house where the kids were, and he wouldn't let her in, and she scratched his car. I mean, this is like, so he's
Hmm.
growing up in a family that's violent, physically violent. They're screaming at each other, and he was also psychotic. He begged them for mental health. His parents didn't listen. I mean, they clearly had their own issues, right? They had their own trauma, their own issues, but they couldn't hear his pleas, and he pleaded for mental health care. The grandmother, so the mother's mother, was the only one that tried to get him any mental health. Actually, she had gotten him an inpatient psychiatric bed. And the father, it was like literally a day before the shooting. So he had a psychiatric bed a day before the shooting, and the father forgot to bring him to the psychiatric
Oh,
hospital.
really?
So these
Hmm.
are parents that are have their own sense of trauma. They have substance abuse. They don't really know how to take care of themselves. And this child was pleading for mental health and never received it. So uh, he also was reported to child welfare. He wasn't he During eighth grade. He didn't attend a class, and child welfare didn't follow up on the case because they said that you have to attend. I guess in Georgia, you have to attend one day of school in order for the welfare system to get involved. And then teachers were notified. The grandmother notified teachers that he was having mental health problems. For whatever reason, that fell through the cracks. And then apparently he had put a message on Discord app that he was going
Hmm.
to become a mass shooter. And he had taken a Russian name for the Parkland High School shooter. And the father, by this time, and this happens in a lot of these cases too, father had bought him a semi-automatic weapon. The father and him used to go hunting a lot, and it's sort of like a recurring issue in these cases where the father feels impotent, the son feels impotent. They bond with hunting, like killing animals, that somehow make them feel powerful and meaningful. So the father bought him a semi-automatic weapon. The FBI went to go visit the father. At this point, he was living with the father, and he denied placing that message that he was going to be a school shooter. The father told the FBI. Actually, it was the sheriff's office at that point. The FBI noticed the sheriff's department. The sheriff went to the house, and the father said, he has a gun, but they're locked, and I'm monitoring him. And the FBI and the sheriff department, I guess the sheriff department, excuse me, put in a report that he needed to be followed up. And I guess there was a change of sheriffs, and that fell through the cracks. And the FBI never bothered to notice that. So he also posted a picture on Discord with his semi-automatic weapon, and it was inside the house. And the sheriff's office and the FBI never bothered to see that it was the house of his father. Apparently the house been on the market, and it was open information that that was his father's house. So they didn't bother to check that. And then, so child welfare fell through the cracks.
Hmm.
FBI sheriff's office fell through the cracks. The school, it fell through the cracks. The grandmother was the only one really trying to love him and give him the care he needed. She felt that, his mental health deteriorated the last time his mother threatened to kill him. And apparently he had the gun at that time, and he called the grandmother. He said, my mom is threatening me. What should I do? And she said, just lock yourself in the bathroom. So he locked himself in the bathroom. And
Hmm.
so this is like the perfect storm. And then also he
Yeah.
was bullied in school. He was ostracized. He didn't have any friends. And it was, again, a smart, sensitive kid. who feels a sense of disconnection. He doesn't belong to anything. I mean, if you look at it, someone with, in my opinion, because I'm a psychiatrist,
Yeah.
someone who has a child, especially, but anyone who has hearing voices telling them to kill, who has delusions, who feels that they're, I don't know, bad or the devil, they need immediate psychiatric medication and care. And the sooner that you intervene, the less, eventually less medications you need to use, the quicker the psychosis responds. And if you delay it, it's harder to treat on many different levels. So, if in our country, well, in the world, I think there's mental health stigma. But if this child was having an appendicitis, you would probably think, even though the parents were having a difficult time coping in their own lives, they would have brought him to the emergency room. But here's a child begging for mental health care,
Mm.
and the parents, it fell on mute ears. And then the father, I don't know, didn't bring him or didn't want to bring him to the inpatient psychiatric bed that the grandmother had secured. So it's a perfect storm. And then also, he had told his mother that he was going to be a school shooter and that he idolized the Parkland shooter. And again, I'll try not to say his name,
Yeah. Yeah.
although, he had all these pictures behind his computer of the Parkland shooting. Like, apparently, he had a shrine to the Parkland shooter. So
Really?
the mother knew that. The mother never bothered to say to the father, you can't give this child a gun. He's suicidal, he's homicidal, he's psychotic, he's struggling, and then you're gonna get, and he wants to be a mass shooter. He's idolizing the Parkland shooter. Um, and father bought him a gun. And that's the gun that he
Mm.
used. I think he hid it in a, I don't. Sometimes I forget all the details of the cases because they all blend in so much.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I believe he hid it in a poster that he brought to school, and then in the final ironic gesture, the mother called the school that morning and said, "I think my son is going to be a school shooter." And the school apprehended the wrong student with a similar name. So this is how
So many holes.
he was under the rug, marginalized, not noticed, not cared for. And this was his way of being seen. This is an unseen, unheard, abused, marginalized, disenfranchised child who feels disconnected and impotent, which is all of these guys really across the board.
Hmm.
And their way of saying, I count, is to be a mass shooter. He also
Okay.
wanted to kill himself, and there was a school resource officer that told him to put down the gun. He just put down the gun. I mean, really, the kid, it seems like a good kid, but the kid needed psychiatric care and didn't get it. The only one who seemed to really listen to him was his grandmother. So it's
Got it.
it's the same story like that over and over again, feeling disconnected, unseen, unheard, marginalized, bullied. And then often they go online and they get radicalized online because they feel a sense of connection because they don't have that anywhere else.
Hmm. Okay, so is it different for people that, go after children? Because, obviously, like, any mass killing is wrong and horrible. But it's just, like, for me, it's a different level of, like, psychological problems when you go into a school and shoot, like, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids, like the Sandy Hook one, and also the one in Texas, Uvalde, right? So with those cases, is there anything different with those people, or is it, like, the same case over and over again?
It's the same case. I also,
Hmm.
yeah, this is the same case. Sandy Hook. It was an adult male though, but he had a very pathological, incestuous relationship with his mother, and he was also psychotic. But so then it's like psychosis, years of psychosis untreated, and
Yeah.
it's amplified. It's amplified. Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like the main things are really like a lack of respect, not feeling seen, being abused, hearing voices, and all these different things. So I'm wondering, because most people, they kind of say that love can solve everything, right? But in your experience, like, do you think it's more of a lack of love or a lack of respect that leads to these mass shootings?
When you say lack of respect, you mean lack of respect for the child?
Yeah. Like from people, like being respected by their peers,
Yeah.
or like even the opposite sex. Because we've had people that have gone after girls because like they've never been respected by women before. So is it more of a lack of love or like a lack of respect and just getting that attention?
Well, I think it's both. So, one, in my work with my patients, we call it a therapeutic alliance in psychiatry, but it's loving someone. It's showing someone that you're there for them, that when they're down and out and they need someone, that you're going to be there for them and that you care about them and that you respect them and that you're going to provide them with the care that they need. So I think it's both. They're
Hmm.
not loved, they're not respected, they're not seen, they're not heard, they're not taken seriously. I mean, this child, the Georgia high school shooter, told his mom he was going to be a high school shooter. And if anyone had bothered to look behind his computer, they would have seen a shrine to the Parkland shooter. He was, and so many of these cases that I've studied, they plead for mental health care and they don't receive it. This is their way of solving. I mean, they feel blown up by society, so they blow up society. They feel there's nothing left to live for. Like they feel hopeless and helpless. Um,
Hmm.
so this is the way that they try to solve their dilemma. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that, they feel hopeless and helpless, right? And then in the article, you mentioned that when young boys, specifically, if they feel that, they tend to equate power with being violent, right?
Yes.
So they go and do something completely crazy, and then, now they do something that hurts a bunch of people. So if a person is in a place where they feel like they might go and commit a mass killing, and no one is helping them out, because you mentioned that the person from Georgia, he tried to get help, but like no one was really helping him. So
Right.
if a person feels like they've been rejected multiple times after asking for help, what can they do to save not just themselves, but a bunch of other people as well?
You mean the child or the society?
The 14-year-old one from Georgia, you mentioned that he was trying to get
So
help. Yeah.
yeah, if I could have talked to that child, I would have said, I mean, I would have gone and brought him to the ER. I have
Mm,
psychotic patients. When I'm seeing patients, sometimes when patients show up, they're psychotic. They don't want to go to the ER. They're not going to go, even though I told them to go. I physically walk them down to the ER to be psychiatrically evaluated. And then, they get hospitalized. So, I mean, he could have brought himself to the ER to get care and
okay,
he
so you
would
should
have
just
he
walk
would
in.
have gotten care. Well, they would have called his parents, but if he's homicidal, suicidal, and psychotic, he's going to get admitted. I mean, I used to run the psychiatric emergency room at St. Vincent's in New York City, and it's a state law in New York that if someone's homicidal, suicidal, they need treatment. They need to get immediate psychiatric treatment, which usually means a psychiatric hospitalization. So but he was begging for it, but he didn't know how to do it. So I would have told him go to the nearest ER,
Okay,
the
so just
biggest
walk
nearest
in.
ER, and he would have been evaluated, and the doctors there would have had to care for him. If they didn't, they would have been liable because that's malpractice. But to me, his parents really were the ones that needed to bring him to the ER and get the care and advocate for him to get the care he needed. And they didn't. They didn't. So sometimes, because of that, the school doesn't want to get involved, and all of the states are different. But sometimes the school, we call it countertransference in psychiatry, but because of the way the parents were, sometimes the teachers don't want to deal with the parents because they're so negligent and not there. And you'll keep on calling them and they won't answer, but then you should go, in my mind, go visit them and make sure, like, take all three of them down to the emergency room or a walk. So I also ran the walk-in clinic. And yeah, so that's what he should have done. Or you know he should have been admitted to that psychiatric inpatient bed that the grandmother had secured for him literally a day before the mass shooting.
Got it. Okay, so now obviously, like a lot of this comes down to the parents keeping an eye on the kid and making sure that they're molding the child in a way that allows them to grow into a healthy human being, right?
Right.
So if a parent, like if they have a young child, and oftentimes it is a boy, and they want to make sure that they do whatever they can to make sure the kid does not go into the psychological space of becoming a school shooter or a mass shooter, what should they focus on? Like, what are different things that they can put the kid in to give the kid not just the self-respect that will help them not do anything that causes travesty among thousands of people, but also like just respect for others as well, right? Because like, you have to get them to respect themselves and respect others. So what are different ways to do that? Because like for me, oftentimes sports is a really good way to make sure that kids are in a good psychological space, right? Like so far from what I've seen, I've never seen a fit um sports addicted mass shooter or school shooter, right? Because oftentimes you can vent that emotion out in physical activity, right? So is there anything else they can do or no?
Well, so I think the Columbine kids were
Mm,
they were popular, and I think they were involved in some sports. So, but you're right. These are as the majority of these children don't have any hobbies. They don't play sports. Like in sports, so I played tennis. I played semi-professional tennis, and I played basketball. And in sports, you learn how to get along with other people. You learn how to socialize. You learn how to negotiate. You learn how to compromise. You learn a lot about yourself and
yeah,
pressure and
yeah,
how to deal with
yeah.
pressure and all of that. Yeah. So, I mean, no, these children were disconnected from everything. They,
Okay.
I mean, sports, I don't think their parents would have. I mean, these are children that didn't go to school. These were children that were so neglected and abused. No one even noticed that they didn't go to school. Like the Georgia high school shooter, he didn't attend a single day of class in the eighth grade, and no
Mm,
one cared. No one cared. So yeah, it would be great if they were involved in a hobby sport. So often, the fathers of these mass shooters um, teach them, buy them a gun, teach them how to shoot it. So the father also taught the Georgia high school shooter. The father also brought him to the shooting range, and apparently bought him a tactical vest and a scope so that you have better visual acuity when shooting. And here's the perfect storm. This is a kid that wants to be a mass shooter, and the father's setting him up literally with equipment to be so. I mean, the father is actually being held accountable now, for the first time, for like each, I think for each of the deaths, he's actually also being held accountable, which
well,
I
really.
think needs to be the case, right? So, yeah, I mean, but these are a sport would be like such a luxury for these child. I mean, they're not even going to
Mm,
school. Many of these mass shooters that I studied are homeless by the age of 13. So they're not getting adequate food. They don't not getting adequate shelter. They're on their own. No one is there for them. They're not going to school. So sports is like it's like in a
it's a
different
different luxury. Yeah,
yeah, different world for them. And yeah, no. Um yeah, it's very sad. I mean,
yeah.
with the Trump assassination, and I try not to say his name, but that boy was so smart. He got awards in math and science. He was super, super bright, but he was bullied, ostracized. Kids mocked him. Um, and he wanted to go down in infamy. This was his way of getting attention, of being connected in some way, in a perverse way.
Okay. Okay. So it seems like, being neglected and just that desire to matter seems to be, extremely prominent in these people, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They
Okay.
feel impotent, and it's their way of being potent. It's their way of being seen, being visible. Yeah,
Got it.
absolutely.
Okay. hmm Okay. So obviously, like as you probably know, mental health is like the main factor here, right? Because, like obviously 40, 50 years ago, mass killings were not as common as they are now. But the reality is, it is going to take some time to solve mental health problems because we've created these issues over the past 15, 20 years, right? So it'll take some time to like really overcome it. So the quickest way to put a stop to these killings and injuries is to restrict these guns to the people that are in these psychological spaces, right?
Yes.
And then, as you mentioned earlier on, like when we were talking, there isn't much gun regulation in the US. So, if you were to make any changes to those gun laws, what would you change? And, like, why do you think that change would help?
So, across the world, if we look at mass shootings in different countries, so in Australia, New Zealand, England, they've had mass shootings and they instituted simple, common sense gun law restrictions, like not being able to buy a gun under the age of 21, background checks if a person has been violent or has a criminal background, mental health background check. I gave a talk in Iceland, and in Iceland, you can only buy a gun if you're seen by two doctors, and one evaluates your mental health, and the other evaluates if you're have a history of violence or any criminal background. So that's the only way you get a gun. So
Mm-hmm.
in these countries like England, New Zealand, Australia, when they instituted common law gun restrictions, the incidence of mass shooting went down. Not surprisingly, right? But in our country, in America, that is, I don't know what the gun laws are in Canada, but I'm sure that you have better
It's pretty strict. It's very strict,
common law.
actually. Yeah.
What?
No, it's like it's extremely strict. Like, it's hard to get a gun.
Okay, so like
Yeah.
common law gun restrictions, right? Here, anyone can buy a gun, and it's a problem with the lobbying, the gun lobby community, which is very powerful and has a lot of money, and
Mm.
then politicians who feel obligated toward the lobbying community that don't want to change the law. So if it would to be common law gun restrictions in our country, like I said, background checks, mental health checks, criminal history, not allowing children to buy guns. It's just it's to me, it's like obvious that if you don't have a gun, how are you going to commit a mass shooting, right? The incidence has to go down. And it's shown actually here with the states that have better gun law restrictions, they have lower incidence of gun violence. So in New York State, which I'm in, New York State has pretty good gun law regulations. I think they're fourth in
Mm.
states in the United States, and I think they're third lowest for having gun violence. So it's
Okay.
this is obvious. Like in the South, like in
Yeah.
Georgia, they don't have good gun law restrictions. In Texas, in Mississippi, in Oklahoma, these are all
Mm.
states that don't have strict gun law restrictions, and they have a higher incidence of mass shootings. So to me, it's obvious that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. I mean, also because I'm a psychiatrist, I feel that it's child abuse. If you have a child who's saying, I'm hearing voices telling me to kill, and I want, you to bring me to get help and you not do it. That to me is child abuse. And on a deeper level, which I think is so important here, because I deal with the unconscious as a psychiatrist, which is that these parents are really, in some cases, using their child as a proxy to express their rage and abandonment. To initiate their children in this cycle of abuse and neglect. So it's complicated, when you start looking at the family dynamics of it, because often the parents are also marginalized, and father usually has history of not being able to keep a job. They're often kicked out of their house because they can't pay rent. Then the parents often are fighting, and they separate, and then the child is, if they're lucky, dislocated from place to place. Sometimes they're homeless by the time they're
Yeah.
13. There was a TED talk by Aaron Stark, and it's called "I Was
I watched
Almost a
that.
School Shooter." Did you see that?
I watched that. I watched
Yeah.
that.
So
That's a powerful
that's
one.
right. That's a perfect example of just showing, if you connect with someone who feels disconnected, if you
Mm.
care about someone who's disconnected, that in and of itself. So he was homeless, right? He came from this family. They were physically violent. He was dislocated. They, in my mind, they neglected him, and he was obese, so he was bullied in school, but super bright. You can tell he's super bright even
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
get
for
go.
sure.
Super
Yeah.
bright. And he wanted to get his revenge because he was bullied at school. He was mocked. He was marginalized. And he went to say goodbye to a friend, I guess, who had let him sometimes sleep there. And the friend said, "You don't look right. Something's not right. Come on in, take a shower, have some food." Just that
Yeah.
one act of
One
kindness
act.
stopped a mass shooting. And I've had so many experiences like that with my patients where, they feel suicidal. They feel there's nothing to live for. And if you're really engaged with them and they know you care, it it can save them. It can save, just being engaged and caring is very powerful. And that TED Talk, Aaron Stark is a good example.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned in New York there isn't as many shootings as there are like down in the South, right? So what actually makes those gun laws different? Like what makes the laws different in New York versus somewhere like Georgia? Like what is the difference here?
So I'm not a gun expert at
Yeah.
all. But I know in New York that there's stricter gun laws, and I'm not exactly sure what they are. But yeah, I know it's harder to buy a gun in New York than it is in Georgia. I'm not exactly sure what
Is it
the
okay?
specifics of that
Specific gun. Okay, yeah. Okay, no problem. So yeah, I mean, obviously, it seems like, as you mentioned, that one act of kindness and making it just hard for people who aren't in the right psychological space or just in general to get a gun, make it more of a process instead of just walking in and walking out with a gun and a bunch of
Right,
bullets, right?
right. In so many of these cases, the victims' families sue the guns that have sold them to these, children. In my mind, you can see if something's not right with someone. I'm a
Hmm.
psychiatrist, but it just seems counterintuitive to sell a gun to anyone, even a person that's down and out and obviously in distress. So yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So okay. So no problem. So in general, let's say we have a normal person that's watching this and then they want to be able to identify if someone is going to be a future mass shooter or mass killer. If you had to give them a checklist of what to look for, what would that checklist be? And like, how should they approach that situation? Because like, you don't want to make it obvious that you view someone as a mass killer, but at the same time, you don't want to just ignore it, right? So like, what would that checklist be and how should they approach the situation?
right. So I would say that these are children that fall through the cracks. So they're not seen, they're marginalized. So I'm going to go through. So I wrote the 10 warning signs of a mass shooter, and
Okay.
maybe I'll go
Okay.
through that if that's okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
No problem.
So often they're smart, as we discussed. They're quiet and they're unmoored. So they don't have friends, or if they have friends, or disenfranchised friends, that are also kind of discarded. They're very quiet. Like with the Georgia high school shooter, I think the girl next to him in home class didn't even know what the sound of his voice was. So these are like
Mm.
really like they're invisible kids. They're like the mother called the school the day of the shooting and said, my son might, be a mass shooter. And they looked for a kid with a similar name. So this is a kid who is invisible, basically.
Wow.
Yeah. So they're also isolated, marginalized, and bullied, like I mentioned. So I forget which case it was, but the mother, it's where the mother and the father both were put in jail for 15 years. And I can't think of the name of it right, the name of the shooting. But in
Mm.
that case, the neighbor wrote an article saying that she knew her next door neighbor's son was going to become a mass shooter because the parents isolated him so much. And she actually offered to babysit him for free because she also had a son and she thought they could play together and he could be socialized, and the mother refused. And then I guess one point the neighbors went on a vacation and then they took this he became a mass shooter with them because she felt so bad for him. And in that case too, he begged the parents for psychiatric care, and it fell on deaf ears. Um, so they're isolated, marginalized, bullied. Often in school, they're mocked because they have poor hygiene, and because they can't take a shower, they don't have proper clothes. They're often hungry, they're not fed right, so they're often mocked in school. And then you have childhood abuse and neglect. So often they're physically beaten, or they see parents beating themselves up. They're screamed at. In case of the Georgia high school shooter, his mother threatened to kill him twice. Uh, an important one here that I feel very strong about is parental minimalization and or denial of the child's mental health illness. So the parents are ignoring or neglecting it. And often the parents have their own mental health illness. Like as in the case of the Georgia high school shooter, both of them were addicted to alcohol and substance. That's actually how the mother lost custody of the kids the first time her urine test came back for opioids and methamphetamine and other things.
Yeah.
So they're not really able to address their own mental health issues, and then they can't address the child's, even though the child in so many of these cases is begging them for care.
Hmm.
And then they're experiencing humiliation and shame. So they feel intense humiliation and shame. They feel embarrassed. They don't feel good about themselves. Why should they feel good about themselves? I mean, I think one of the mass shooters that I studied, he was sleeping in the insulation in his house,
Really?
and he didn't have proper clothes and food, and he couldn't take a shower, and he would go to school, and kids would bully him. It's really tough if you're not getting your minimum basic requirements to feel good about yourself. And then you have mental health illness on top of that. So that's a really important one, feeling shame and
Shame.
humiliation.
Yeah.
And then a lot of them, like I said, that study that we had, and I should say that a problem in the research of mass shooting and terrorism is that it doesn't get funded. So, for instance, the study that we did, and I did the study with other psychiatrists and a death row lawyer, but we did it all pro bono. We didn't get paid, even though it was, I mean, I spent 2 or 3 years studying this. Most research do not have psychiatrists. They have psychologists, they have other people, criminologists, but they don't have psychiatrists. So often the mental health aspect of mass shootings and terrorism is not adequately looked at. So, the research, if you look at the research with the FBI, they'll say that anywhere from 30 to like maybe 60% have a mental health illness. But we actually found, and we had psychiatrists in our team, that 87.5%, which was by far the majority, had
Yeah.
severe mental illness. They actually were schizophrenic. Um, and once they got, I can give an example after I talk about this, but basically,
Yeah.
most of these people are psychotic, they're suicidal, they're homicidal. So I can give the instance of, I can't say his name. It's a Thurston high school shooting. It's again, it was a high school, and I'm gonna try not to say his name.
Yeah. 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 No problem. No problem.
Okay. He basically heard three male voices, one telling him to kill, one telling him that he was a bad person, and the other third male voice was commenting on the other two. His He told his father that he was hearing voices, he wanted psychiatric care. The father, I think because of health and mental health stigma, was embarrassed and ashamed of the son, refused to bring him. His solution, the father's solution, was he threatened to send him to military academy. So this was a kid who got explosives. He made explosives. He was blowing up explosives in his garage. The parents do nothing,
No.
and so he's grossly psychotic. I think he was 14 or 15. He killed both his parents. The next day, I think he killed a number of students, injured a number of students. and somehow he wasn't killed. So he was put into the penal system. Again, a really bright guy. He got his GED, he got his BA. He teaches yoga, and oh, I should most important thing, he was put on an antipsychotic, and literally within 10 days his auditory hallucinations stopped. So with antipsychotics, they treat auditory visual hallucinations within 10 days. Delusions take longer. But literally, this boy's distress of a voice telling him to kill stopped in 10 days with proper psychiatric medication. And he went on to be like this model prisoner. He teaches yoga in the prison to other inmates. He um, got his electrical degree. He's an electrician in the penal system, and he prays for all the people he killed. So
Really?
it shows you, with treatment, this could have been avoided. It's so sad. So
Yeah.
yeah, so these people deserve immediate psychiatric care.
Hmm.
And then another one is that they have difficulty coping with stressors and trauma, given they're not taught how to, or, their parents can't model how to deal with failure, loss, defeat, humiliation, shame, and they don't know how to cope. So, how they cope by going online, getting radicalized, and then feeling a sense of belonging.
Hmm.
And then many of them have fantasies about violence. They all have fantasies about violence, whether it's writing it in a homework assignment. Many of them write it in their diaries. Like I mentioned with the Georgia high school shooter, he on Discord he wrote he was going to be a mass shooter. Sometimes they draw pictures, saying, please, please help, the voices won't stop, which was the boy whose both parents were found guilty, although the mother was trying to get out of jail because she just didn't understand, really her part in this and
Mm.
in making him a mass shooter. So there's always fantasies about violence. And then there's overt statements about violent plans. So, for instance, the Georgia high school shooter telling his mom, I'm going to be a mass shooter, right? And I think he also told her he was obsessed with the Parkland shooter in Florida. So, just listening to someone. You don't have to even be a psychiatrist and try to read between the lines. I mean, they will overtly tell you either in writing or in statements that this is what they plan to do. And then the last one, which our country seems to not be able to wrap their head around, is
Yeah.
easy access to a firearm. In so many of these mass shooters, their father bought them a weapon, even though they knew that their child had mental health struggles and was being neglected, bullied, marginalized, wasn't going to school, had no interest. Um, that's it's the perfect storm. So I would say those are the 10 warning signs that you
Signs.
should look for in a child that might become a mass shooter. These are
Yeah.
children that are really invisible, unfortunately. Most people don't see or hear them or recognize them.
So, I mean, to be honest, like most people, like just based off common sense, you'll be able to tell if someone is not in the right mental space, and if you can feel if they're going to do something that they shouldn't do, right? So, like,
Absolutely.
but why do so many people just ignore it? Because it's such a common theme of just blatantly ignoring the signs. Like, why exactly is that?
Well, I think most people don't want to get involved, like it's a headache or they
Yeah,
don't have time,
nervous
they have to
too.
rush into work or they have their own problems or,
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, but I will say in so many of these cases that I studied, classmates, neighbors will report to the FBI that they think that this child might become a mass shooter, and it falls through the cracks anyhow. So I always say,
hmm,
if you can, reach out to a child that you're seeing that's bullied, that's marginalized, even if it's just like saying, hi, how are you, and being kind. Like what happened with Aaron Stark, right? Offering him some food, offering him, like, love and care. That can be enough to stop it. So I just think most people don't want to get involved because they feel like they don't have the time, or they don't want the headache. But it doesn't have to necessarily be bringing someone to an ER, right? Which is really involved. It can be just, you don't look right. Can I do something for you today? I don't know, give you some water? Can I give you some food? Something's not right here. What can I do to help you? Just it's the simplest thing, but just reaching out to someone that's being bullied, marginalized, and is disconnected, like these kids.
Okay, so I think a couple years ago there was a shooting in Nashville, and then the individual, I think that person was a transgender individual, right? In
Mhm.
Nashville. Now there was a conversation that that person was having with a friend of hers on Instagram or something, and in that conversation, it seemed like the friend was doing a really good job of being nice and telling that person that they're worth something, they're beautiful, and then all these things. So in that case, why did being kind not work? Like, what was the issue over there?
Well, I think that these are complicated issues, and kindness may not in and of itself be enough.
Yeah,
If someone, it might, and also kindness might work for a while, but then the person's probably going to go, if they don't have a relationship with that person, they might go back to feeling like disenfranchised and enraged, right? So, I mean, kindness isn't always going to work, especially if someone has, is psychotic or has mental illness. They're going to need repeated acts, not only of kindness, but really of psychiatric care, right? So kindness only goes so far. Like I think with Aaron
yeah.
Stark, he really wasn't psychotic. I
No,
think he
he
was really
wasn't.
depressed. Yeah. So if someone is psychotic, think of it, it's torture. Like if you have a ringing in your ear, it's torture, right? Think of having a voice in your head constantly telling you to kill,
Yeah,
and
that's
no one's doing anything about it. And you're telling all these adults, I need help, and no one does anything about it. I mean, that is severe torture. And that's
yeah,
almost impossible to ignore. You can't treat it on your own. You need help. So, like an act of kindness, yeah, it might help for a little bit, but it's beyond kindness in my mind. You need immediate psychiatric care. You need medical care.
yeah. So you mentioned that many times people have told things to the FBI, but it's like slipped through the cracks, right? So
Absolutely.
would it be fair to say that one of the other things that people can do is just to tell maybe the parent of that kid that they might have to take them to the ER, or should they just not do that when it comes down to like psychosis signals and stuff like that?
So I would say that the school, child
Mm,
welfare, the FBI, the sheriff's department, all of them should have taken the kid, with the parents, ideally with the parents, to the ER together, to get him evaluated. So I in so many of these cases, if you had told like the Georgia high school shooter that you need to take your kid to the ER, they wouldn't have done it.
than
They
anything,
wouldn't have
yeah.
followed through with it. So it's, telling them that, but literally also bringing them there. I mean, as I had mentioned with psychotic patients of mine, they don't want to go to the ER. They're delusional.
Yeah.
They're terrified, and they need someone to bring them there. I mean, I recently had a suicidal patient, and he had written a suicide note to his loved ones, and I said, someone needs to accompany you to the ER, and he was compliant. But I mean, in these cases, someone needs to bring the child to the ER, and if it's not the parents, then someone needed to bring the parents and the child to the ER, because
Mm,
it would have fallen on mute ears with the parents. They weren't, you could have told them that, and they
they've
they
done nothing,
probably
yeah.
wouldn't have done it. Yeah, they weren't
Okay.
taking care of themselves. So, and the grandmother, was telling the parents as well, and did tell the school, this is something's not right. This kid needs help. He got evaluated, and then it all just fell through the cracks. So, I think as a society, all these systems need to communicate better with each other, and we need better plans of integration and action in terms of how do you deal with a child who's neglected and get him mental health care when the parents aren't really able to get him care. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about, the victims of mass shootings here. Now, obviously, when this happens, people have a lot of trauma, and then it just kind of carries on for the rest of their lives, right? So if people have been affected by a mass shooting, whether they've, been injured or they were there at the event, or if they know someone who was in a mass shooting that's, been severely injured and now that bothers them, what is the best way to cope and not let it kind of ruin the way that you approach life?
Right. So, yeah, anyone that has been involved in a mass shooting or knows of someone who's been in a mass shooting or was in a school system where there's a mass shooting is going to have a significant amount of trauma.
Yeah.
And that person, in my mind, should receive, psychiatric or mental health support, because there's going to be a grieving period and a mourning period, hopefully, that they can get to process, and then they can hopefully go back to living. So my expertise is in treating trauma victims. I actually survived two terrorist attacks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so my book in part is about my book is psychoanalytic and spiritual perspectives on terrorism, desire for destruction, and just remember, desire for destruction is easier. But
Mm.
yeah, it's part memoir. So I was a first responder at 9/11. I lived in New York City at the time, a mile away from Ground Zero, and I used to run down there. I I was training for the New York City Marathon, and I became a big marathon, ultra marathon runner. But I went down there to help, and I developed breast cancer. And I had a
Oh,
mastectomy, and then I did humanitarian work. I provided medical care to Chechen children. So Chechnya is part of Russia. Um, it's in the North Caucasus of Russia, and it's a very complicated history there. But just briefly, I'll say that they were fighting for independence since Catherine the Great, and Putin basically waged a war there. My book goes into the details, but there was the apartment bombing
wow.
incidents. I don't know if you heard about that.
Not the apartment bombings,
So the
no.
apartment bombings were basically there were 11 apartments throughout Russia that killed hundreds of people. I think it was like 250 people, injured thousands.
Really?
And Putin blamed it on the Chechen terrorists.
Mm,
And
yeah.
then it came out that the FBI, sorry, the the what's it called? KGB, or the KGB planted them and killed the people. And it was Putin's excuse to go in and kill people in Chechnya. So he actually they were found red-handed because there was bombs found under one of these apartments in Russia, and people started watches because of all the apartments that exploded, and they found the explosives, and they were material that only the KGB had access to, even though Putin denied it. So he was found
Yeah.
red. He was found like literally his hand in the cookie jar, right? But
Yeah.
he always denied it. So he went to Chechnya, and it was a genocide. It's what he's doing in Ukraine. He's done in Georgia. He's done in Syria, but he's doing it in Ukraine now. He killed over 200,000 people in Chechnya. To make a long story short, I
Mm,
went there during the war and the genocide, and I helped provide medical care to the people there, the Chechen people there, both in Chechnya and the refugees. And actually, I was poisoned by a KGB agent and almost
oh,
died.
really? Like on
3 years.
purpose?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No.
Wow.
Oh yeah. No. 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 Even
Wow.
yeah. So yeah. So I can empathize with people that have been involved in mass shootings or seen a mass shooting. Yeah. Yeah. So I would say that if someone, I would say that really everyone should be screened if they've been a part of a mass shooting. But um, some people are very resilient and might, not need mental health care. But I think it would benefit anyone, to be honest with you.
So
It was
you,
that amount of
mhm.
trauma.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned that you've been through two terrorist attacks, which is, which is crazy, and you've also been poisoned on purpose, right? So
Yes.
like, obviously, that's a level of trauma that a lot of people just don't really understand, right?
Yeah,
So like,
especially
yeah,
Americans. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
we're so privileged and insulated here. I think that was what 9/11 is about, but like we fooled ourselves to think that those things don't happen here. They do happen here.
yeah.
Um, but yeah.
How did you not let that ruin your perspective of human beings? You know what I mean? Because like, if you see that, you're like, it's hard to trust people after that, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, that's what my book is about. So
Okay,
I
that's
had
what it
a
goes into. Yeah,
profound spiritual awakening. Literally, I was dying for 3 years. So I was an elite endurance athlete. I ran ultra marathons. I did Ironman marathons, and all of that was taken away from me. And it was not only was it a profound shock to my body, just endorphin wise, like I couldn't get endorphins, but it was it was like the worst thing that could ever happen to me because the way I cope is to run for like 2 hours, three
oh
hours
yeah,
max.
yeah, yeah. That high
And
is too good, eh?
yeah,
That runner's
exactly.
high is too good. Yeah,
Oh, it's the
yeah.
best. It's the
It's the best.
best.
Yeah,
For me, it's
it
the
is the
best.
best. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mm.
I couldn't have that. And I was dying anyhow. I don't even know how I would get to work for 3 years. And I had this spiritual epiphany. I really changed as a person. I had an education spiritually as well. And I had to figure out, it's all in my book, but I had to figure
Yeah.
out, like, I had to figure out, and because I'm a doctor, I think in part it was easier, like what I think that he put in my drink or in my food. I'm not even sure like what he put it in, but yeah, or a beer. I used to like beer at the time. I developed all these allergies. So I developed pneumonia. I developed GI parasitic infections, like serious ones for like, I don't know, like 15 years. I developed 25 food allergies. I eat very healthy. Like I would have food allergies to turmeric and garlic. Like
Yeah.
anything that I would eat, I developed an allergy to. And it was all from this. Um, I developed an autoimmune disorder basically from being poisoned. And the irony is that it transformed me. I had this spiritual epiphany where I think I became much more expansive and much more loving of people, even
Oh,
though,
really?
yeah, it was incredibly traumatic. I mean, it still has physical consequences to date. So, but it did, in some weird way, it saved me.
Really? So, like, were you talking to someone to, help you not go down a darker path, or did you just naturally have that awakening to the
So
traumatic
I,
event?
as a psychiatrist, and I'm also a psychoanalyst. I've been psychoanalyzed, so I see someone regularly, and um, she helped me. But I would say the spiritual epiphany is really what saved me, and that was really work that I did on my own spiritually. That's what saved me, as well as loving friends and family, but this spiritual epiphany is what saved me. Yeah.
So, what was that spiritual work? Like, what
Oh
exactly
boy.
was that?
So I
That's
got
a
a whole,
lot.
yeah, I had a guy got a, like I got a PhD in
Yeah.
spirituality.
Yeah.
I worked with many, many people, spiritual like people. It's so hard to explain. It's all in my book. I mean,
Okay.
it's like
We'll put your book
when it,
in the video description. Yeah.
yeah, it's so hard to explain, but it's all there,
Hmm.
how I did it. And I started meditating also. Like I would meditate for hours. Like I was a person that couldn't sit still. I still have a hard time sitting still, but
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
get to the point where I, meditated an hour a day, and it 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 was it's hard to explain because it's in the numinal world. It's so hard to put words to it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so it seems like the main thing is just to get psychiatric help, and if you can, start looking into like spiritual practices. to help you
And
overcome certain things and
yeah.
not let it
And
ruin your perspective of people.
yeah, and I also think for me personally that when you save other people, you save yourself. So, reaching out and volunteering with people who are suffering, or doing something that's more expansive. And then you realize, people have problems too. You're not the only person suffering. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And
So
if you can make a
mhm,
difference in someone's life, it's a tremendous gift. It really is.
it really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, Dr. Cerfolio, we only have 1 hour together. It always gets good near the end of the hour. But no, maybe in some time we'll go into your book and
Okay.
I'll dive into those practices and we can talk more about how to overcome traumatic experiences because that seems like a pretty interesting topic and it seems like something that you know pretty well because you've been through it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If you
So
read my book, I would be
yeah,
honored if you leave a review.
I will read the book. I will read the book. Yeah.
Yeah, to get the word out. It is an academic book. Some people have a hard time reading it, but it is written for lay people. It's written for smart people. So, yeah, I would
Okay.
really appreciate your feedback.
Yeah. No problem. No problem. I will read it. I will read
It's
it.
so nice meeting you. Keep
It
up the
it
good
was
work.
really good to meet you. I will keep in touch with you, and as time goes on, we'll look to do that in person. But if people want to find your work and really look more into you, where would you tell them to go?
So my website is www.ninacerfoliomd.com. Yes.
Okay,
And
and we'll
also,
put
I'm
your
on
book.
Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram too.
Okay, so basically, okay, so yeah, we'll put your website, your book, and the article in the video description, and people can go and read it and check it out if need be, and ask you for help if need be.
Thank you. So nice meeting you. Keep up your good work.
No problem, no problem. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I really
You're a
appreciate it.
natural.
I haven't. I
You
try. I
are.
try. I try.
You're
I
great.
try. Thank you so much, Dr. Nina. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
I appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Yes, please take care. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye.
Bye now.